So yeah, thank you everyone. I'm really happy to be here today at my first EAFT Summit, and I'm especially happy to be here among some DCU familiar faces where I studied, as Nina mentioned. So as Nina also mentioned, I want to talk to you today about the power of terminology and the role it plays in enabling localization quality at scale, which is a large scale that we operate at Meta. Just a note before I start, Meta has so Facebook was the company brand a couple of weeks ago, and we've renamed ourselves now to Meta. So when I say Meta, it's basically the old Facebook company brand that had all of the products such as Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, etc. So Nina already gave a great intro on me, but just to explain a little bit more about my current role before I dive into the presentation, I am a language manager in the localization team at Meta, and I have a focus on terminology. So basically, my job is to make sure we're enabling localization quality through robust terminology management programs and processes. Today, I want to talk to you about the scale and scope of localization at Meta. I'll go through then briefly the kind of overall principles around terminology and how it ensures quality in general. And then I'll go into more detail around how it ensures product localization quality at scale at a company like Meta. I'll then go into a bit more detail about how we manage terminology at Meta to enable localization quality of our products. And then I'll show you all some real world examples of localized terminology in our products in context. And then I'll finish up by tying back to the theme of the summit this year around terminology and challenging circumstances. I'll talk a little bit about challenges we're currently facing at Meta when it comes to terminology management. So first, just to set some context about the scope of localization at Meta. So it might come as a surprise to some of you, the kind of scale that we operate on when it comes to the localization program at Meta. So the content and products that we create are available in up to 100 languages. So we have 100 languages that we support for translation purposes. One of my favorite statistics that I really like to share, especially with English speaking content writers at the company at Meta, is that a majority of people use our products in a different language. You would think, it's a US born English company that most people might use the products that we create in English, but of course that's not the case. It mightn't be surprising to you all because you have kind of a global mindset. You know that a lot of people in the world don't speak English, of course, but yeah, it's a statistic I really like to share just to highlight that the real importance of localizing the products that we build at Meta. And another stat I always like to share, just to give you an idea of translation volumes, the kinds of volumes that we deal with at Meta, is this one. Our translators produce millions of translated words every single week. So we have large volumes of content to translate every week. Before I go into the specifics of why terminology is important to us at Meta and what it enables us to do for localization quality, I just want to do a brief recap of how terminology benefits translation or localization quality in general. So if we take it from the classic time, cost, quality triangle that we're all familiar with, from a time point of view, documenting terms improves linguist productivity. So those of you who have translated before, I'm sure you're always happy to receive a glossary when you have content to translate, because you can just already use those pre-established and approved translations for the terms that appear in your content. And it also means that you don't have to ask questions or queries, as we say in the industry sometimes. If we document terms, we're reducing the number of translator queries or questions we'll get about terms or concepts that appear in our content. From a cost point of view, it's cheaper to localize when you do terminology management properly upstream, because it means that you're telling the translators how a term should be translated and how it should be translated consistently. If you don't do this, what often happens is a term gets mistranslated or inconsistently translated, and then we have to spend more money to go back and retranslate the content to make sure it's correct and accurate after the fact. So it's actually cheaper to localize content if you do practice terminology management. And from a quality point of view, term entry information, so how we define terms, the example sentences we give, the part of speech, etc. All of this terminology, term metadata enables linguists to find an equivalent in their language. So it's basically the information they use to find what the translation should be in their language. That's how we view it at Meta as well. And documented terms, I am not seeing my end of my screen. Anyway, okay, sorry about that. I'll go into now details about how terminology is crucial for product localization quality, so not just localization quality in general. So as I mentioned, at Meta, we build products. One of them is Instagram, for example. So I wanted to show you here a couple of screens from my own Instagram profile, which is in German. Just for context, the German translation of an Instagram post is Beitrag. And so I wanted to show you here that if I, a user, want to go to my notifications and change my notification behavior around posts, it's really important that posts is translated in the exact same way on each screen that I will enter when I go to my Instagram app. So here, when I go to my Instagram app, I look for the Benachrichtigungen, the notifications page. I look for Beiträge because I know that's what the translation, that's what posts are on Instagram in German. And then I go to the next screen and it again says Beiträge, it says Erste Beiträge. So it's keeping it consistent so I can actually do the thing that I want to do in the app. So terminology for us is crucial for user experience. It's also crucial for accessibility of products in non-English markets. So if we don't translate interfaces accurately or consistently, it can make users just abandon a flow altogether. It can make users just not use our products altogether. So it's really crucial for ensuring that we have our products be accessible in other languages. And finally, another point that maybe isn't often thought about is we need to ensure that our product terminology matches exactly the other kinds of materials we create to support those products. So if you take, for example, an Oculus headset, the product, the user interface in that headset, the software itself needs to have the exact same terminology as the packaging that Oculus headset will be delivered to the user in. Take another example of, say, the Instagram Help Center. So it's where you can go to understand how to do things like change your notification settings. If I go there and I'm reading an article about how to change my notification settings on Instagram, it's important, it's vital that those terms match exactly the terms that we have in the user interface so I can actually achieve the task that I want to achieve. And I'm going to speak now a little bit about how we manage terminology at Meta. We can summarize our focus areas into 3 big buckets, so process, education, and tooling. In terms of process, I wanted to give you an insight into the kinds of processes we work on to enable that quality through the terminology management program. So our first and one of our most important processes is what we call the term identification criteria. These criteria are the guidelines that tell us what words are considered terms at Meta. So it needs to be specific to the content that we write at Meta, so that English content writers who are building new products and writing new content know what kind of terms they should be adding to our term base to then enable them to be translated and used consistently in translated materials. Another really important process that we've put in place to kind of enable localization quality is what we call a localizability check. So again, this is a service that the English content writers can avail of before they've finalized their content. They can submit a request to our team to understand how a concept might be localized in a different language. If it will be difficult, if it raises any red flags. If you take, for example, Instagram Reels, which are short videos that you can create and watch on your Instagram feed. When a content writer is coming up with that concept of a reel, there's a lot of metaphor going on. It's kind of like a reference to films, reels. So they would have submitted a localizability check to our team to understand if how would that translate into other languages? Do we have a similar concept? Can we localize it creatively and with that metaphor that's present in the English term? And then the last key process is term translation and review. Obviously, my team needs to ensure that all of the terms we add to the glossary every single day are translated and reviewed and in the most scalable and automated way as possible, given the volumes that we have. Another aspect of our work on terminology at Meta is education. So we do a lot of education, evangelization about the importance of localization, but also the importance of terminology for localization. And for English, that usually makes people in English interested as well if you talk about the benefits it can bring to English. So we work with existing content writers who add terms to our term base every day. Make sure they're doing that and make sure they're defining the localizability of the terms in a way that works. We also work with new content teams who haven't yet started programs to add terminology to our term base. So we work with them and explain the impact of terminology for them for English, but also for the translated languages of their product to get them on board and get more and more terms added to our term base all the time. And the final aspect is tooling. So we have a localization tooling team, and they build our localization tools that we use to localize meta content. In the terminology team, we work very closely with this team to make sure that our needs are met in terms of the terminology tooling or the localization tooling that we build for our translators or for our in-house language teams as well. So some of the key workflows we've worked on in the past with this tooling team are, for example, terminology query management. So we do have a channel through which all of our translators can flag questions or issues with existing terms. So for example, say that ads manager, one of our products, was marked as DNT, do not translate. If that really won't work for simplified Chinese, for example, that translator can flag that as an issue and we can review and change the localizability setting if relevant, for example. We also have a workflow that translators can flag terms that are missing from the glossary. So if they're working on content and they see a new product name or a feature name they don't know anything about, they can flag that too, and we can look into it and make sure it gets documented. And finally, term translation workflows, as I mentioned, those are our bread and butter core workflows to what we do. So we need to work with the tooling team on those as well. I now want to show you some, as I mentioned, real world examples of terminology that we've localized in my team and kind of what went on behind the scenes in the terminology cycle. So a couple of years ago on Facebook, we launched a feature called Locked Profile. What it means is that if I lock my profile, which I have, you can see in the screen, it means that anyone on Facebook that isn't my friend will have a very restricted view of my profile. So you'll see here, you can't really see much. You can see my name, you can see intro friends, you don't see anything even there. So we launched this feature, and at the time, the term lock hadn't been documented in our term base, so the translators didn't have the context on what it meant. And many languages translated locked in this context as blocked because it was the most natural translation of locked in many languages. So I wanted to take the example of Italian. I don't speak Italian, so apologies if I'm not pronouncing this correctly, but initially locked profile in Italian was translated as profilo bloccato, so blocked. And this raised a huge red flag to our English content teams because they explained that this is not what the feature actually does. It doesn't block anything or anyone, it just locks your profile from a view point of view. So our translators called this out and we had to add it to the term base, define the term, and found different translations in the different languages. So the current translation of locked profile in Italian is here on the screen as well. It's profilo chiuso, so kind of the back translates as closed profile. So this is an example of how our products can be accurately translated by terminology management when it's done properly. Another key aspect of terminology and the power of terminology for localization quality in a product context is consistency. This is a real example from Ads Manager, one of our products where people on Facebook can create ads. And in that product, you can add a header to your ad, which just is like basically a title. And you can see in this screen here that the German translation is inconsistent. We have 3 occurrences of Titel and 1 occurrence of Überschrift. So it's confusing. You're in one field and you're thinking you're writing something about an Überschrift, and then you're in another screen and it says Titel. It's not the most dramatic example, but it just shows inconsistency, which damages the quality of our product. So these kinds of examples happened a lot, and it actually led our content design team to change the terminology identification criteria that we work with at Meta. The content designer, so the content writer who actually worked on this initiative is in the audience today. Her name is Almudena, and she actually worked to analyze all of these kinds of cases and occurrences in other languages and change the term identification criteria that we work with to include this here, which is a word not necessarily unique to Meta, but that appears repeatedly in a single flow where consistent use of terminology is critical for the user experience. So that was a really great success for us in the localization team that Almudena helped to implement. And I'm going to finish up now just speaking a bit about the challenges we currently face at Meta. It's not exhaustive. We face many challenges when it comes to terminology, but some of the ones I wanted to share with you today are here. So one is a constant challenge of ours is really trying to meet the needs of our translators. So we aren't at an ideal state where every content team adds terms to the term base all the time. It's something we're always working on. And as I just mentioned, we are constantly evolving the term identification criteria. At the end of the day, our terms are added by English content writing teams. So it's not always the same use case for them as for our translators that arguably often need more terms to be added to the glossary or our term base, so we're constantly working on that. We analyze questions from our translators, such as an example I've showed here of Instagram Reels. We analyze those questions to understand where the gaps are, and then we evolve the program as we go. Another kind of recent and new challenge that we'll face is localizing the metaverse. For those of you who aren't familiar with this concept, the metaverse basically is a virtual space. It's related to virtual reality. So I'm showing a screenshot here of one of our products called Workrooms, where you could have an avatar and attend a work meeting in virtual reality. So we already have virtual reality products at Meta, but we'll have more and more as we are kind of focusing more and more on building the metaverse with other technology companies in the industry. And this will be a challenge for localization and for terminology localization, because there might be new concepts that arise here that mightn't have a name yet in certain languages, or it'll also mean that we need to be really creative in our translations. So I wanted to just briefly include one example here for English into French. We have, as I said, many products where we use the term room. So we have work rooms, we have messenger rooms, and they're virtual rooms where users can join and either have a work meeting or a chat with friends on Messenger. And room, in English, we say room as in a room for in a house, or room in this context of this product. In French, we have multiple ways of translating room. We have pièce, we have salle, and we have salon as well, which is what we went for this product, to kind of really try and capture that virtual room concept that we have in English, not something just like salle. It didn't really work. So this kind of new concepts will be a challenge for our team. And that's me. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening. I hope it was insightful, and thank you for having me.